On September 6, 1997, while the eyes of the world were fixed on Westminster Abbey, Princess Diana was laid to rest somewhere very different. Not in London, not among kings and queens, but on a small, guarded island in the middle of a quiet lake, deep inside a private English estate called Althorp. Diana was just 36 years old when she died in Paris on August 31, 1997. Her funeral was watched by more than 2.5 billion people worldwide, one of the most viewed events in human history. And yet, her grave was deliberately placed where almost no one could ever reach it. Althorp had been home to the Spencer family since 1508, long before the House of Windsor ruled Britain. It was here that Diana spent much of her childhood. It was here that her brother, Charles Spencer, made a decision that quietly defied royal tradition. Instead of burying Diana in a royal chapel, the family chose isolation over ceremony, distance over access, and privacy over protocol. The island burial was not symbolic poetry, it was practical. Security threats, media intrusion, the relentless global obsession that had followed Diana in life and refused to stop after death. Today, visitors can walk the grounds of Althorp. They can see the lake. They can stand at its edge. But they are not allowed to cross, because the place where Princess Diana rests was never meant to be visited, only protected. And the mansion behind that decision has its own long history of power, grief, and quiet defiance. This is the story of Althorp, and why it became the only place Diana was ever truly safe. If you value deeply researched stories about forgotten Gilded Age wealth, power, and the architecture that shaped history, consider subscribing. And let me know in the comments which estate or dynasty you want explored next. Chapter 1: The Unreachable Grave. On August 31, 1997, at 12:23 a.m. local time, Princess Diana was pronounced dead at the Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris. She was 36 years old. Within hours, the news traveled faster than any royal announcement in modern history. Television networks interrupted programming. Newspapers rushed out special editions. By sunrise, the world was already mourning a woman whose life had never truly belonged to her. 6 days later, on September 6, 1997, London became the center of global grief. More than 1 million people lined the streets from Kensington Palace to Westminster Abbey. Flowers piled so high they were cleared by truckloads. Inside the Abbey, heads of state, royalty, and dignitaries filled the pews. Outside, an estimated 2.5 billion people worldwide watched the funeral live, one of the largest television audiences ever recorded. The ceremony was public. The sorrow was collective. The moment belonged to the world. But Princess Diana was not buried at Westminster Abbey. When the cameras shut off and the crowds dispersed, her body was taken away from London, away from the royal landmarks, and away from public view. Not to a cathedral. Not to a royal vault. Not even to the Spencer family churchyard where generations of her ancestors lay. Instead, Diana was buried at Althorp, the private ancestral estate of the Spencer family in Northamptonshire, a house that had stood on English soil since 1508, long before the modern monarchy took shape. Her grave was placed on a small island, at the center of a man-made body of water known as the Oval Lake. There were no crowds, no public procession, no access. The island was deliberately chosen because it could not be reached on foot. From the shoreline, visitors can see the water. They can see the trees. They can see the distant outline of the memorial. But they are not allowed to cross. There is no bridge, no path, no exception. This was not an act of symbolism designed for poetry or romance. It was a calculated decision made in response to a reality Diana had lived with for over 15 years. Relentless public pursuit. Her brother, Charles Spencer, later explained that the island offered something Diana had rarely known: protection. The water created distance. The estate created control. And private land laws ensured that even in death, her space could not be violated. In life, Diana had been followed by cameras. In death, the family refused to let that continue. Althorp, once a house built to represent aristocratic power, became something else entirely, a barrier between Diana and the world that claimed to love her. Today, thousands walk the grounds every year. They read the plaques. They stand at the edge of the lake. And then they stop, because the most famous woman on earth lies just out of reach. And that raises a question that history has never stopped asking. Why was the world invited to mourn Princess Diana, but never allowed to follow her to her grave? Chapter 2. Althorp before Diana, 500 Years of Power. Long before Princess Diana's name became known across the world, Althorp was already a monument to power. The Spencer family acquired the estate in 1508, during the reign of Henry VII. At the time, England was reshaping itself after civil war, and land ownership was not merely wealth, it was influence. Althorp sat at the heart of this system, expanding over centuries into an estate of more than 13,000 acres, guarded not by walls, but by tradition, lineage, and political relevance. For generations, the Spencers were not ornamental aristocrats. They were active participants in Britain's ruling machinery. Members of the family served as members of parliament, confidants to monarchs, and power brokers whose loyalty mattered in moments of national uncertainty. Their proximity to the crown predated the modern House of Windsor itself. Althorp House, rebuilt in its current form in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, was designed to communicate this authority without apology. The symmetrical Baroque facade, the long approach drive, the controlled geometry of the surrounding landscape, none of it was accidental. The house was meant to be seen from a distance, approached slowly, and understood as immovable. Inside, the architecture continued the message. Grand staircases, portrait galleries lined with generations of Spencer faces, ceilings designed to dwarf the visitor. Althorp was not built for comfort. It was built to impress, to intimidate, and to endure. This was a house that understood power as permanence. Yet power has a strange habit of outliving its purpose. By the 20th century, Althorp no longer served as a political headquarters. Britain had changed. The aristocracy had retreated from governance into symbolism. But the house remained, large, expensive, and emotionally cold. By the time Diana Frances Spencer was born on July 1, 1961, Althorp had become something quieter, but no less imposing. A family monument to a past that could not be escaped. Its rooms were filled with history, not intimacy. Its corridors echoed with legacy, not laughter. And while the Spencer name still commanded respect, the house itself was no longer a place of power in the traditional sense. It was a reminder of expectations and of the burden carried by those born inside it. Althorp had been constructed to shape leaders, secure alliances, and project control. It was never designed to raise a sensitive child. And within those walls, one was already growing up. A child who would one day inherit not just global attention, but the unresolved weight of a house built for authority, not affection. Because a house built to command the world rarely knows how to protect the people inside it. Chapter 3. A Lonely Childhood Inside a Grand House. Princess Diana's earliest memories were formed inside Althorp's vast rooms. Spaces so large they often felt empty, even when occupied. Born the third daughter of John Spencer, Viscount Althorp, and Frances Roche, Diana's childhood unfolded against a backdrop of privilege that concealed instability. The marriage between her parents was deeply unhappy, strained by pressure to produce a male heir and by emotional distance that grew impossible to ignore. In 1969, when Diana was just 8 years old, her parents divorced, a rare and publicly scrutinized event within aristocratic society at the time. Custody battles followed. The house that symbolized Spencer continuity became a legal battleground, and the atmosphere inside Althorp changed permanently. Diana later described her childhood as deeply unhappy. Despite the size of the estate, she often felt alone. The staff were numerous. The rooms were endless. But warmth was scarce. Althorp did not adjust to children. Its routines were rigid. Its emotional language restrained. Vulnerability had no architectural space. Diana was shy, sensitive, and eager for reassurance, traits that clashed with a household governed by expectation and silence. After the divorce, her mother left Althorp, and Diana remained with her father. The separation left a mark that never faded. She struggled academically, felt insecure around peers, and developed a strong need for affection that the environment around her did not know how to provide. Wealth insulated her from hardship, but not from loneliness. Boarding schools followed. Time away from home increased. Althorp became less a place of belonging and more a backdrop, something she returned to, but never quite settled into. Yet even in isolation, the house shaped her. Walking its grounds taught her solitude. Living within its formality taught her restraint. Growing up unseen within its grandeur taught her empathy for invisibility. Ironically, the same house that failed to nurture her emotionally would later become the place chosen to protect her absolutely. As a child, Althorp was safe but not warm, secure but not comforting, impressive but not loving. It gave Diana shelter, but not sanctuary. And that distinction would define her entire life. Because long before the cameras arrived, before the crowds, before the global obsession, Diana had already learned what it meant to feel alone inside beautiful spaces. A lesson she would carry with her, far beyond the gates of Althorp, and straight into the arms of the world. Chapter 4. From Althorp to the Crown. For most of her early life, Diana Spencer existed on the margins of public awareness. Despite her aristocratic lineage, she was not raised under constant scrutiny. Althorp, with all its emotional distance, still provided insulation from the outside world. The routines were private. The expectations were familial. The consequences of failure remained contained. That separation ended abruptly in 1980. At 19, Diana began appearing in the orbit of the British royal family, initially as a peripheral figure, a young woman known more for her shyness than for ambition. She was working as a nursery assistant in London, living modestly and largely unprepared for what proximity to the monarchy truly meant. The transformation from private individual to public subject happened with astonishing speed. On February 24, 1981, Buckingham Palace officially announced the engagement of Prince Charles, heir to the British throne, and Lady Diana Spencer. Within minutes, her name dominated headlines around the world. Photographs taken outside Clarence House showed a young woman smiling uncertainly, already struggling beneath the weight of expectation. The engagement marked a turning point that could not be reversed. Until that moment, Diana's identity had been shaped by lineage and upbringing. From that day forward, it would be shaped by spectacle. The contrast was immediate. Althorp represented inherited privacy, land that shielded rather than exposed. The monarchy represented visibility as duty. Every gesture, every expression, every silence became material for interpretation. At Althorp, history existed in portraits in stone. At the palace, history unfolded live. Diana was expected to adapt seamlessly. Training followed. Protocol replaced instinct. Spontaneity became a liability. Her voice softened. Her movements were studied. Her appearance was curated for symbolism rather than comfort. The public, however, saw something else. They saw vulnerability. They saw sincerity. They saw a young woman stepping into a role far larger than herself. This visibility created adoration, but it also erased boundaries. Paparazzi attention intensified almost immediately. Diana was no longer observed, she was pursued. The transition from estate life to royal figurehead was not gradual. It was immediate and unforgiving. Althorp, once distant and emotionally restrained, now represented something Diana had not fully recognized before: refuge. The estate's walls had been thick enough to hold her anonymity. The crown's walls were transparent by design. What had once felt like isolation now appeared as protection. What had once felt empty now seemed safe. By the summer of 1981, Diana's life was no longer governed by personal rhythm. It moved according to schedules written by others' press briefings, public appearances, institutional expectation. Her story had become public property. The shift from Althorp to the monarchy was not simply a change of residence or status. It was a fundamental transfer of control from family to institution, from private heritage to public performance. And once that transfer was complete, there was no return. Because from the moment the engagement was announced, Diana ceased to belong to herself. Her image did. Her movements did. Her future did. A life that had once unfolded quietly behind the gates of Althorp now belonged to the crown, and to the world watching. Chapter 5: Marriage, Media, and the Loss of Refuge. On July 29, 1981, Princess Diana married Prince Charles at St. Paul's Cathedral. The ceremony was broadcast to over 750 million viewers worldwide, transforming a personal union into a global spectacle. For the monarchy, the marriage was stability. For the public, it was a fairy tale. For Diana, it was the formal end of anonymity. From the moment she stepped into her role as Princess of Wales, pressure replaced privacy. The expectations were not subtle. She was to embody continuity, dignity, and national symbolism while navigating a marriage already strained by incompatibility and emotional distance. Royal life offered structure, but little shelter. The media, emboldened by public fascination, intensified their pursuit. Diana was not followed in the abstract. She was tracked physically outside palaces, during private holidays, even in moments of visible distress. Photographers staked out locations for hours, waiting not for events, but for vulnerability. The line between public duty and private existence dissolved. Diana's popularity only accelerated the intrusion. She connected instinctively with crowds, spoke openly about human suffering, and displayed emotion that contrasted sharply with royal restraint. This authenticity drew admiration and magnified exposure. The press no longer documented her life. It consumed it. What had once been protection royal walls, royal security, became a magnet. The monarchy's visibility amplified scrutiny rather than containing it. Diana's movements were logged, anticipated, and intercepted. As the pressure mounted, Althorp took on renewed significance. The estate remained legally private. Its land still imposed distance. For a time, it offered something the palaces could not, the illusion of retreat. Diana returned there when she could, seeking the familiar geography of childhood, hoping the scale of the house would absorb attention as it once had. But the world had changed. Paparazzi learned the boundaries. Helicopters hovered near the estate. Long lenses erased distance. The rural setting that once discouraged intrusion now invited it. Althorp's openness, its lakes, its expansive grounds, made surveillance easier, not harder. The sanctuary began to shrink. Even within family walls, Diana could not fully relax. Visitors were monitored. Conversations were cautious. Privacy had become conditional. The very fame that made her a symbol of compassion also stripped away her ability to escape observation. The emotional toll became visible. Diana struggled with isolation, disordered eating, and mounting anxiety. The pressures of marriage and media intertwined, reinforcing one another. Public expectation demanded perfection. Private reality delivered fracture. Althorp, once emotionally distant but physically secure, was losing its capacity to protect. The house had been built to guard power, not attention. Its boundaries were architectural, not psychological. And attention, once unleashed, does not respect gates. By the late 1980s, the idea of refuge itself was becoming fragile. Diana was recognizable everywhere. Her presence altered any space she entered. The concept of home, once tied to location, was dissolving into something abstract. There were no neutral spaces left. The marriage continued under public scrutiny, its private failures dissected in headlines and broadcasts. The same media that celebrated her compassion fed relentlessly on her pain. What Althorp could offer now was memory, not protection. A reminder of a time before cameras dictated movement, before silence required negotiation, before retreat became impossible. And yet, even that reminder was fading. Because when the world learns how to follow you, distance becomes meaningless. And Diana was learning, with growing clarity, that even the walls of her childhood home were no longer thick enough to hide her. Even home could not protect her anymore. Chapter 6. Divorce and Return to the Spencers. By the mid-1990s, the marriage between Prince Charles and Princess Diana had become unsustainable under the weight of public scrutiny and private fracture. Years of speculation, media revelations, and institutional strain had eroded what little stability remained. What had once been presented as a national symbol of continuity was now a visible collapse. On August 28, 1996, the divorce was finalized. With a single legal decision, Diana's position within the monarchy changed permanently. She retained the title Diana, Princess of Wales, but lost the style Her Royal Highness. The distinction was not ceremonial alone. It marked a reduction in status, authority, and protection within royal structures. She was no longer fully inside the institution, yet never truly free of it. The loss of HRH altered Diana's relationship with the crown, but it did not erase public obsession. Security arrangements were renegotiated. Access changed. The protective machinery of the monarchy stepped back, even as attention from the media remained relentless. In this new space between belonging and exclusion, Diana turned instinctively toward her family. The Spencer name, older than the monarchy she had married into, represented continuity without spectacle. Althorp, emotionally complex but familiar, resurfaced as a point of grounding. It was not a solution. It was a reference point. Here, she was not a symbol. She was a sister, a daughter, a member of a lineage that did not require performance. The return was emotional rather than physical. Diana did not permanently relocate to Althorp, but the estate regained significance as a place of identity rather than obligation. It represented a version of self that predated global judgment. Yet this return was incomplete. Without HRH status, Diana's access to royal security diminished. She moved more independently, arranged her own travel, and navigated public life with fewer institutional buffers. The world still followed her, but the structure that once absorbed some of that pressure had withdrawn. The paradox was unmistakable. She had regained autonomy but lost protection. She had reclaimed identity but remained exposed. Althorp, once again, symbolized belonging without insulation. It offered heritage, not immunity. The Spencer family could provide emotional grounding, but not invisibility. Diana's public role shifted. She focused increasingly on humanitarian causes, leveraging her popularity to draw attention to issues such as landmines and AIDS awareness. These choices reflected freedom of action, but they also placed her directly in the public eye, often without the protective distance monarchy once enforced. She was no longer acting on behalf of an institution. She was acting as herself. That authenticity deepened public connection and intensified scrutiny. In this transitional period, Diana occupied a fragile space. She was no longer confined by royal expectation, yet still defined by royal association. She belonged everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Althorp represented what could not be taken from her: origin, history, name. But it could not shield her from what she had become, a global figure whose presence transformed any space she entered. Belonging had returned. Protection had not. And as Diana stepped into this uncertain freedom, the line between independence and vulnerability grew increasingly thin. A woman had reclaimed her identity, but the world was still watching. Chapter 7. August 31st, 1997. The End That Shook the World. In the early hours of August 31st, 1997, Princess Diana's life came to an abrupt and public end in Paris. Shortly after midnight, Diana left the Hotel Ritz with Dodi Fayed, accompanied by their driver Henri Paul and bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones. Attempting to avoid pursuing photographers, their vehicle entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel at high speed. At approximately 12:23 a.m., the car crashed. Diana was critically injured. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. She was conscious initially, but suffered severe internal injuries. After extensive efforts to stabilize her at the scene, she was transported to Pity-Salpêtrière Hospital, where she was pronounced dead several hours later. She was 36 years old. News of the crash spread across continents before dawn. By morning, shock had turned into disbelief. Television networks broadcast continuous coverage. Radio stations suspended regular programming. Newspapers scrambled to confirm what felt impossible. The reaction was immediate and unprecedented. Outside Kensington Palace, crowds gathered spontaneously. Flowers, cards, and personal messages began to accumulate within hours, transforming the gates into a public shrine. Similar scenes unfolded in cities around the world. Grief crossed borders without instruction. The intensity of the response revealed something extraordinary. Diana had become more than a public figure. She had become a shared emotional presence. At the same time, the media scrutiny that had defined her life intensified rather than receded. Questions surfaced almost immediately. Footage was replayed repeatedly. Photographs were analyzed. Commentary multiplied. The same global attention that had followed her movements in life now surrounded her death. Paparazzi involvement became a central focus of public anger. Photographers were detained and questioned. Ethical debates erupted across newsrooms. The relationship between media and monarchy, between public demand and private boundaries, was forced into the open. Diana's death was not only a personal tragedy. It became a cultural reckoning. As mourning expanded, logistics followed. Plans were made under intense pressure. Where would the funeral take place? Who would attend? How would the monarchy respond to a public grief that felt both spontaneous and accusatory? And beyond the ceremony, a quieter, more consequential question emerged. Where should Princess Diana be laid to rest? Royal tradition offered options. Westminster Abbey, a royal vault, historic burial sites tied to the crown. Each carried symbolism and exposure. The Spencer family faced a decision unlike any before it. The scale of public attachment made any choice politically sensitive. Security concerns were immediate and concrete. The potential for intrusion was undeniable. This was not simply about honoring the dead. It was about managing a legacy that no longer belonged to one family alone. As the world demanded access, the family considered distance. As cameras waited, they considered concealment. And in the aftermath of a death witnessed by millions, the final question was not how Diana would be remembered, but how and where she could finally be protected. Because even in death, the world was still watching. And the decision that followed would quietly defy expectation and reshape the meaning of rest itself. Chapter 8. The Burial Decision That Defied Royal Tradition. In the days following Princess Diana's death, public grief moved faster than protocol. Flowers continued to rise outside royal residences. Editorials questioned the monarchy's silence. The world expected a farewell that matched the scale of loss. But beneath the visible mourning, a quieter process unfolded, one that would determine not only how Diana would be honored, but how she would be protected. Royal precedent offered clear paths. Members of the royal family were traditionally buried in royal vaults, most notably St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, or memorialized within historic religious spaces tied to the crown. Westminster Abbey, while not a royal burial ground, had long served as a stage for national remembrance. Both options were considered. Both were rejected. The reasons were practical, not symbolic. Any burial within central London would require permanent public access. Even restricted royal sites attracted constant visitors. Security could be managed, but never absolute. The risk of intrusion, deliberate or unintentional, was unavoidable. For the Spencer family, this was unacceptable. Diana had lived under unrelenting scrutiny for over 15 years. In death, her family resolved that the pursuit would end. Although Diana had married into the royal family, she was born a Spencer and legally, she remained one. Following the divorce in 1996, her status within royal hierarchy had shifted. The authority to determine her burial did not rest solely with the crown. It rested with her family. At the center of that authority was Charles Spencer, Diana's younger brother and 9th Earl Spencer. As head of the Spencer family and custodian of Althorp, he held legal control over the estate and final responsibility for decisions regarding family burials. This distinction mattered. Althorp was not royal property. It was private land, governed by family law rather than state protocol. Choosing Althorp was not an act of defiance, it was an assertion of autonomy. Initially, the family considered burying Diana in the Spencer family church at Great Brington, where generations of Spencers were interred. But the location posed challenges. Its accessibility, small size, and proximity to public roads made it vulnerable to constant visitation and disruption. Security assessments made the risk clear. The solution emerged within the grounds of Althorp itself. At the center of the estate lay the Oval Lake, a man-made body of water created in the 18th century. Within it, a small island offered natural separation, visible yet unreachable. No roads, no footpaths, no casual access. The island met every requirement the family had struggled to reconcile: dignity, privacy, and permanence. There would be no public grave, no queues, no daily intrusion. The water provided distance that walls could not. Private land ensured enforceable boundaries, and the estate's scale allowed for discreet, continuous security without spectacle. For Charles Spencer, the decision carried emotional weight. In his eulogy at Westminster Abbey, He spoke openly about the pressures Diana had endured and the failure of institutions to protect her. The burial choice reflected that sentiment in action rather than words. It was a refusal to surrender her final resting place to public consumption. The decision, however, confused and unsettled many. To a world accustomed to access, restriction felt harsh. To admirers who had mourned collectively, the inability to visit her grave felt like exclusion. Questions surfaced. Criticism followed. Some interpreted the choice as withdrawal, others as control. Few understood the underlying motive. This was not about denying love. It was about ending pursuit. The Spencer family was not attempting to rewrite Diana's legacy. They were attempting to contain it to prevent it from being worn down by constant presence and endless exposure. In choosing Althorp, they chose separation over symbolism, a quiet island over a public monument, protection over pageantry, distance over devotion. It was a decision rooted in experience in years of watching attention turn invasive, admiration turn dangerous, and access turn into entitlement. The world had claimed Diana in life. In death, her family reclaimed her. And yet, as the gates closed and the water settled around the island, one truth became clear. This was a choice the public would see, but never fully understand. Because history had trained the world to expect visibility. And Althorp offered something far more unfamiliar. Silence. Chapter 9. The Island in the Oval Lake. At the center of Althorp Estate lies the Oval Lake, a serene expanse of water that stretches for several acres. It is meticulously maintained, its banks lined with trees, lawns, and walking paths. Within this lake sits a small, secluded island, unadorned in its geography, yet monumental in meaning. This is the final resting place of Princess Diana. The island itself is modest. A single gravel path leads nowhere. There are no bridges, no docks, no visitor access. On it sits a simple memorial, a white marble gravestone bearing her name, dates of birth and death, and a single inscription chosen by her family. In loving memory of Diana, Princess of Wales. Surrounding the grave, the island is encircled by water and shaded by mature trees, giving it an almost ethereal quality. The visual impact is subtle but deliberate. It is visible from the shore, but entirely unreachable. The choice of location embodies a careful balance between symbolism and security. To some, the island represents peace, isolation, and reflection, an emotional retreat where Diana can rest without intrusion. It is a quiet stage for memory, framed by natural beauty rather than pomp or ceremony. To others, the isolation signals inaccessibility, a deliberate barrier between the public and the woman they admired. Yet beyond symbolism lies practicality. The Oval Lake's waters serve as a natural boundary. Security teams monitor the perimeter. Trespassing is prohibited under private property laws. Surveillance ensures that visitors respect the distance, and any attempt to access the island is immediately thwarted. The design prevents intrusion not through intimidation, but through geography and legal authority. It is a rare fusion of natural landscape and deliberate protection. The island also transforms the act of mourning. While thousands may visit Althorp annually, they experience Diana's presence from the shore through sight, but not touch. The separation imposes a reflective, almost meditative quality on remembrance. Visitors are reminded that love and admiration are not entitlements. Respect, not access, is required. Althorp Estate enforces this rule rigorously. Tours of the grounds allow glimpses of the lake and island, but guides stress the impossibility of approach. Photography is limited in angle. Guests are discouraged from wandering beyond paths. For over 2 decades, these policies have successfully maintained both privacy and dignity, even as public fascination remains unrelenting. The island raises a quiet, enduring question. Does its isolation protect Diana, or does it separate her from the people who loved her? The answer is complex. Protection is tangible distance, legal authority, and physical barriers ensure her final resting place cannot be violated. Separation, however, is equally real. Unlike other memorials open to the public, this grave cannot be approached, touched, or personally experienced. The very act of keeping her safe transforms mourning into observation. In the end, the island embodies duality. It is sanctuary and symbol, security and solitude, presence and absence. It reflects both the choices of a family determined to guard her and the global reality of a life that could never be fully private. Visitors leave Althorp with one fact undeniable. Princess Diana rests in a place that mirrors her life itself, watched, admired, and endlessly remembered, yet just out of reach. The question lingers, is this distance protection, or is it separation? Chapter 10. Why the public was kept away. The secrecy surrounding Princess Diana's grave at Althorp was not born of arrogance, nor of disregard for her admirers. It was born of experience. For decades, the Spencer family had witnessed how public fascination could transform admiration into intrusion, respect into obsession. By 1997, the lessons were clear. Unrestricted access would be both unsafe and unsustainable. Long before her death, Diana had been relentlessly pursued. Paparazzi followed her on holidays, outside hospitals, even during routine errands. Helicopters hovered overhead. Cameras captured every smile, every tear. The media obsession did not end with divorce or diminished royal status. On the contrary, it intensified. Every step she took, every public engagement she attended, became material for headlines. This history of intrusion informed the family's decisions after her death. In 1997, photographers attempted to access Althorp Estate within hours of the news breaking. Curiosity, grief, and opportunism converged as strangers tried to approach the grounds, hoping for photographs, footage, or the faintest glimpse of the princess's final resting place. Even well-meaning admirers had the potential to disrupt the sanctuary the family sought to preserve. The media's behavior following her death reinforced the urgency. Continuous broadcasts dissected every aspect of her life, funeral, and memorial. Newspapers printed images of the estate's perimeters. Television crews attempted flyovers. The line between reporting and intrusion had blurred beyond repair. Every advance in technology, long-lens cameras, satellite imaging, live feeds meant privacy was no longer simply a matter of walls or gates. In addition to these practical concerns, the legal framework of Althorp provided a tool for control. The estate is private property, governed by English law, and the Spencer family had both the authority and precedent to restrict access. Trespassing, whether intentional or accidental, could be addressed immediately under civil and criminal statutes. The water surrounding the island, the absence of any footpaths, and clearly marked boundaries were not symbolic alone. They were enforceable measures. This legal control allowed the family to define the terms of public engagement, balancing mourning and respect with security and dignity. Ultimately, the decision to keep the public away was a paradoxical act of care. It acknowledged that the very love which had made Diana one of the most admired figures in history also carried danger. Uncontrolled access could have led to accidents, intrusions, or desecration. It could have exposed staff, family members, and the princess herself to risks that extended beyond mere inconvenience. The grave's inaccessibility was therefore protective, not exclusionary. It was a deliberate, calculated barrier, designed to ensure that Diana's final resting place remained exactly that: final, undisturbed, and secure. And yet, this protection carried its own emotional weight. By closing the island to public access, the family created distance between Diana and the millions who had loved her. The very admiration that had defined her life now had to be constrained to maintain safety. Love, once celebrated openly, had become dangerous. Chapter 11. Althorp as a living memorial. Althorp Estate did not remain merely a private home after Princess Diana's death. Over the years, it evolved into a living memorial, a place where her life could be honored, remembered, and preserved, but always on the family's terms. This transformation was deliberate, carefully curated, and rooted in both respect and control. The Spencer family recognized early that public fascination with Diana would not fade. Millions of admirers wanted to connect, to witness, to pay tribute. Yet the island grave could never accommodate such demand. The solution lay within the house itself. Select rooms within Althorp were transformed into exhibition spaces, accessible only to guided tours and scheduled visits. These rooms now house personal items, photographs, and memorabilia that chronicle Diana's life from childhood to her final years. Visitors encounter objects carefully chosen to convey intimacy and character without compromising privacy. Her early school uniforms, childhood photographs, and letters reflect the personal side of Diana that the world rarely saw. These are complemented by artifacts from her public life. Dresses she wore at official engagements, photographs from humanitarian missions, and curated documents that highlight her advocacy for causes such as landmine clearance and AIDS awareness. Each item tells a story, but always within the narrative framework established by the family. This controlled curation serves a dual purpose. First, it preserves Diana's legacy in a tangible, accessible form. Visitors leave with a sense of who she was not just as a Princess of Wales, but as a person shaped by experiences, challenges, and values. Second, it maintains a sense of order and dignity. Unlike public memorials where crowds and commercialization can dilute meaning, Althorp allows memory to be experienced quietly, intentionally, and respectfully. Every display, every room, every path through the estate reflects conscious decisions about what the world may see and what it may not. For example, the exhibition carefully balances her royal life with her personal identity, highlighting humanitarian achievements while avoiding sensationalism. Even the island grave, visible from the estate but physically inaccessible, reinforces the principle that Diana's life can be remembered without being intruded upon. The family ensures that admiration does not become obsession and respect does not become intrusion. This approach transforms the estate itself into a living memorial. Althorp is no longer just a house built to demonstrate wealth, status, and lineage. It is a space that carries memory, shapes perception, and preserves narrative. The estate acts as both a container and a filter. It contains Diana's life and legacy, and it filters how the world engages with them. Visitors come seeking connection, and leave with understanding, but always within the boundaries set by the Spencer family. Yet this careful stewardship also introduces tension. The memorial is designed to manage perception as much as preserve history. By controlling what can be seen, Althorp inherently separates memory from mourning. Guests encounter curated artifacts, symbolic displays, and guided narratives, but they cannot experience the unmediated reality of grief, intimacy, or personal loss. The estate mediates emotion, transforming mourning into observation. In this sense, Althorp's memorial is both protective and paradoxical. It safeguards Diana's dignity, prevents intrusion, and ensures legacy, but it also shapes collective memory in a way that separates it from unfiltered human experience. Visitors leave informed, inspired, and moved yet aware of an absence, the intangible reality of a life both public and private, celebrated and constrained. The house that once guarded the Spencer family through centuries of political change now guards the memory of the woman who became its most famous occupant. It preserves her story without exposing her vulnerability, honors her life without compromising her rest. And yet, as visitors step away from the exhibition rooms, they are left with a quiet question. Can a memorial ever truly satisfy the desire to mourn? Memory is preserved. Mourning is contained. And in that tension lies the delicate paradox of Althorp, a house that remembers, protects, and guides, even as the world continues to grieve. Chapter 12. Architecture as a silent witness. Althorp Estate is more than a collection of rooms, halls, and gardens. It is a chronicle in stone and landscape, a silent witness to centuries of power, joy, sorrow, and human ambition. To understand the role it played in Princess Diana's life, and ultimately in her death and memorialization, it is essential to read the house itself as a character. Its architecture, its grounds, and even its deliberate isolation communicate narratives that words alone cannot capture. The estate, as it exists today, is the result of over 5 centuries of accumulation, reconstruction, and design. When the Spencer family acquired the property in 1508, Althorp was a modest manor. Over the centuries, each generation expanded it to reflect not only their wealth, but also their status within British society. By the late 17th and early 18th centuries, the house had been transformed into the symmetrical, Baroque-style mansion recognizable today, designed to convey authority, stability, and permanence. Its long drive, framed by avenues of trees, was a deliberate act. Every approach instilled awareness of the estate's importance, both to visitors and to those who lived within it. Inside, Althorp's galleries are lined with portraits that capture generations of Spencers. Staircases soar, ceilings rise, and rooms unfold in formal sequences. Every architectural element is calculated to signal hierarchy and legacy. The house is a statement. It absorbs history not as a passive container, but as an active participant, reinforcing the narrative of aristocratic continuity. Those who pass through its halls are aware consciously or unconsciously that they inhabit space shaped by centuries of lineage, expectation, and ritual. Yet architecture is not neutral. Its scale and symmetry can inspire awe, but it can also isolate. For Diana, Althorp's grandeur was both protective and alienating. The estate offered boundaries against the outside world, yet those same walls could not compensate for emotional distance. The formal gardens, the echoing corridors, and the deliberate proportion of rooms reflected authority, not intimacy. In life, the house shaped her perceptions of safety, privacy, and solitude. After Diana's death, Althorp assumed a new role. Its design, intended for visibility and status, became a tool for protection and commemoration. The oval lake, once an ornamental centerpiece, now cradles the island grave. Its waters enforce separation without aggression. Long vistas and controlled sightlines guide visitors' experiences, framing the memorial while keeping it physically untouchable. Inside the house, the exhibition rooms are arranged to direct movement, attention, and emotion. Objects are displayed to narrate a life, but within boundaries the visitor cannot breach. Althorp's transformation illustrates how architecture absorbs history and then reshapes it. The mansion, once a home and symbol of aristocratic power, became a stage for legacy and mourning. The estate itself mediates the relationship between public and private, memory and spectacle. Its physical form enforces rules that words cannot. The lake dictates distance, the halls communicate dignity, the rooms preserve story. Visitors leave with a sense of having witnessed, even participated, in remembrance, yet the estate ensures that boundaries remain intact. This silent witness role is remarkable because it reveals the dual nature of architecture. Buildings do not simply exist, they accumulate meaning over time. The walls of Althorp have observed triumphs and tragedies, celebrations and conflicts, births and deaths. They have absorbed the emotional imprint of generations, and in doing so, have gained authority over how stories are told. Diana's presence, both in life and death, became another layer in that historical tapestry. The estate's structure, once a tool of control, now serves to protect memory. Its walls, floors, and landscape act as intermediaries between past and present, between grief and admiration. Yet this transformation is not without tension. Althorp embodies both accessibility and exclusion, legacy and constraint, observation and privacy. Its architecture shapes emotion while simultaneously regulating it. For visitors, the estate offers insight into Diana's life, but always under the estate's control. The mansion has changed purpose without changing its fundamental character. It still communicates authority, still enforces boundaries, still interprets history on its own terms. For a house that has witnessed over 5 centuries, Diana's story represents a defining chapter. Althorp has absorbed the weight of her life, her death, and the world's fascination with both. Its spaces now carry dual meanings as home and as memorial, as stage and as sanctuary, as witness and as guardian. And yet, as the lake reflects the sky and the mansion stands silent against the horizon, one truth remains undeniable. Althorp is no longer just a house. It is history made tangible, memory made physical, and a house changed forever. Chapter 13. The only place she was ever safe from the first moments of her life at Althorp, Diana Frances Spencer experienced a paradox. Wealth, status, and beauty surrounded her, yet emotional safety was scarce. The grandeur of the estate, the authority of her family, and the weight of tradition created a life framed by expectation rather than intimacy. Yet that very environment, cold as it could be in childhood, would ultimately become the space where she could rest physically, symbolically, and permanently in a world that had claimed her at every turn. Diana's journey was defined by boundaries. As a child, Althorp's walls contained her, shaping her understanding of security and restriction. As a royal, the crown imposed new boundaries, invisible ones dictated by protocol, media scrutiny, and public expectation. At every stage of her life, the spaces she occupied were both protective and constraining. Yet these same boundaries had never been entirely her own. She moved from one set of controls to another, from her parents' rules to boarding schools to royal protocol to public obsession. Safety was rarely self-directed. In death, that dynamic shifted. The choice of Althorp as her final resting place was deliberate, calculated, and deeply personal. It was not the crown that would guard Diana. Westminster Abbey, Windsor, or any other royal site, while grand and symbolic, could not guarantee privacy. The estate could. The island in the Oval Lake offered both visibility and distance. A grave that could be seen but never reached, a resting place that allowed admirers to honor her without violating her peace. Charles Spencer, acting as head of the family, exercised a form of authority Diana had seldom possessed in life. By situating her grave within the estate, he translated the lessons of intrusion and exposure into protection. Althorp became a sanctuary precisely because it combined history, geography, and legal autonomy. The house that had once failed to nurture her emotionally now shielded her in perpetuity. Its boundaries were absolute, enforceable, and respected by law, unlike the walls of palaces or the media-controlled spaces of her royal life. The physical isolation of the island mirrors the emotional reality Diana lived under for decades. She existed publicly, performing for a world that loved her yet never truly knew her. Althorp, in contrast, represents what had been largely absent: control over who could enter her space and under what terms. In this way, the estate functions not only as a resting place, but as an enduring statement. The woman who had been followed everywhere in life would finally remain undisturbed. Visitors to Althorp today witness a duality. They see an estate preserved over centuries, reflecting aristocratic continuity, architectural grandeur, and careful curation. They see exhibition rooms, personal artifacts, and the distant reflection of the island grave. But they also sense absence. The public can admire, remember, and honor, but cannot touch or intrude. Diana's life and legacy are available, yet insulated. This is the paradox of safety. It requires distance. The estate has transformed grief into controlled memory, admiration into observation, and presence into protection. Reflecting on Diana's life, death, and legacy, one cannot separate the person from the spaces she inhabited. Althorp witnessed her birth, her formative years, and ultimately her eternal rest. It absorbed the pressure of public fascination, the trauma of intrusion, and the sorrow of loss. The estate's landscapes and architecture became active participants in the narrative of her life, translating history, emotion, and memory into tangible form. Her story, therefore, comes full circle. The house that shaped her childhood, constrained her autonomy, and bore silent witness to her formative years now fulfills the role it never could in life. It guards her completely, finally, and definitively. The same walls and grounds that once felt emotionally distant now provide security, dignity, and permanence. In this way, Althorp is both a memorial and a guardian. For Diana, the ultimate truth of her journey is reflected in the estate's waters, gardens, and halls. A life lived under observation, a death watched by billions, and finally a resting place where she is truly free from intrusion. Althorp is not merely a house. It is a testament to her life, a witness to her story, and the only place she was ever completely safe. In the end, her rest belongs not to the world, not to the media, not to protocol, but to the family, the land, and the estate that knew her longest.